Hello everybody, it is Wednesday, it is the view from the top and we are live. Hi to John coming from Cascais in Portugal, a lovely part of the world, and to Stefan coming from Munich, people coming from all over the world. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about how you manage a highly mobile workforce. How do you pre-plan so that you have the employees ready to go whenever you need them on a moment's notice. And I'm so excited. We have backstage with us Ferzeen Chhapgar, and she's going to be telling us about her experience with some of the most leading and iconic consulting firms in the world, and talking about how to manage a highly mobile workforce. It is going to be a great, great show. And she has got a fantastic backstory, and we're going to be talking about herself and how she moved around the world. And I won't spoil it now, but you are going to love it. We've got a great, great show. But you know how it works, everybody. Please join in the conversations, write in the comments box, tell us who you are, where you are, what's going on in your world. We want to hear from you. We want to see your comments on LinkedIn. We are live right now on LinkedIn. We are live on YouTube, and you can also find us on Spotify if you want to watch us or hear us as a podcast. Now, I know a lot of you do like to get your CPE codes, and we have some great CPE codes as ever. You can get your CPE codes from ERC, from SHRM, and from HRCI, and I'll leave them up there. So many thanks to our good friends at Worldwide ERC for the GMS and the CRP codes. There you can see it there. Many thanks to our friends at Rocket Mortgage, who help us each week get the HRCI and SHRM codes. So there you are. So that's that. Next week, we've got another really interesting show. We're going to be talking about how you connect global mobility with talent. So that's next week's show. And I think you'll really enjoy that one too. So do mark your calendar for that. There's been a lot going on in the world. And we are actually going to do a show in a few weeks' time covering some of the geopolitical events that are going on right now. So bear with us. That will be a couple of weeks' time. We've got a major show coming up. But there's also news on maybe a slightly lesser scale of what's going on in our own wonderful industry. So what is the breaking news? The breaking news that's been going on in the wonderful world of global mobility over the last 7 days. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's have a look. Let's run the video. And here we go. So there we have it. Congratulations to everyone who's been promoted, everyone who's got a new job. And indeed, if you're looking for a job, there's loads of jobs out there. And a special shout out to my good friend Doris Camp, who has announced her retirement. So on behalf of everybody in the industry, Doris, we wish you a very happy retirement doing whatever it is that you want to do. It's your retirement. So have a great retirement, and hopefully you will still see you around on some of our events over the coming years. So we're now going to move on to talk about immigration. Now, the Fragment annual conference, partner conference, is going on right now as we speak in Amsterdam, which is really exciting. But it does mean that Julia can't be with us today because she's actually at that event. I think she's actually speaking at that event. But I'm so excited. We can welcome back to our show the wonderful Gemma Hislop, who's going to give us our immigration update this week. She's been on the show before. She's an absolute star. So everybody, you know how it works. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's welcome to our stage the wonderful Gemma Hislop. Hi, Gemma. Thanks for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Whereabouts in the world are you today?
It's a pleasure, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. I'm in sunny but chilly London today.
Cool. Well, thank you. But it's not London or the UK you're going to be talking about. You're going to be telling us about parking.
Indeed. Yes, absolutely.
Interesting area. So tell us all about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Absolutely. So I'm going to talk about parking today in the context of the US H-1B visa lottery. So those of you who are immersed in that world will know that with only 85,000 places available in the H-1B lottery each year, it is vastly oversubscribed with hundreds of thousands of people applying every year. And unfortunately, given the comparison, those numbers, lots of recent graduates or early careers individuals are then left without visa routes to remain in the US. So Global Mobility needs to think strategically about what to do with those individuals. Some will return to their home country with a view to reapplying under the H-1B cap in 12 months' time, but others may be parked, and that's the term we refer to, parking. It's basically moving individuals to third countries to allow them to continue to work for the business, remain in close contact, so business continuity continues, but also be able, positioned to reapply for the H-1B in due course. So we'll talk briefly today about the locations to which individuals can go, long-term planning, and key planning considerations for global mobility. So parking is a smart bridge really between short-term immigration challenges and long-term workforce planning, all aimed at minimizing the disruption to the business. So on the first point, where can these individuals go? Obviously, there are lots of opportunities available, but if we're thinking about well-established and well-functioning visa routes with high English language usability and relatively low costs, we can consider, for example, Canada's global talent stream. It is obviously US adjacent, so time zone friendly, English language forward, and a relatively low government fee. Similarly, Ireland offers a critical skills permit route, which has low government costs, is family friendly, not typically a huge concern for these individuals, given that their careers are embryonic, they tend to be quite young, but still something to bear in mind. There's also Portugal. Whilst not majority English speaking, if someone were to apply for the tech visa, for example, English tends to be the common language within the tech sector in Portugal. And the government costs are really competitive in Portugal, meaning from a budget perspective, it's very attractive. And
why didn't they just
lastly, Australia. There, they have a visa for high demand roles, and what they absolutely could just go home, indeed. But when you bear in mind things like time zone considerations, infrastructure that's available to those individuals, and also, that their intention, what is it they want to do? When you're in a fight for talent, you need to bear in mind, what the individuals are looking to get out of the potential move. So, having a strategy that feeds to that and offers that flexibility can be a key distinguisher against competitors in the market. Yeah, so those are the countries, that might be top of mind. But a pro tip when thinking about these kind of things is to think about jurisdictions where your business is already established. That means that your admin and tax considerations are hopefully that little bit easier, and it also facilitates speed to landing, i.e. getting the person on the ground and allowing them to continue working for the business effectively. Next, we'll consider long-term considerations, because whilst parking is typically a temporary thing, sometimes individuals are moved and they
when you say temporary, how long would that be typically that you're parking someone for?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the H1B lottery occurs every 12 months. So typically what you'd be looking to do is move someone to that third country for 12 months or so. So they're there working, poised and ready to reapply for the H1B visa. Fingers crossed, they get lucky the second time round and then can make that application to move back to the US. Yeah. So in terms of, as I said, typically a temporary move, but sometimes people move and they thrive in their new environment and they want to stay there permanently, or, that the role in the US may no longer be ongoing. So in that instance, if you think about the options already, there's Canada, Ireland and Australia. They all offer routes to permanent residence or settlement based on employer work experience. And that gives companies flexibility to pivot in the event that individuals do want to stay there. So again, the pro tip there is thinking about parking destinations as part of your talent pipeline, rather than just a pause. Focusing on countries that have a route to permanent residence allows you to be agile as needed. And then lastly, just thinking about a few practical considerations for global mobility. Obviously, budget is always top of mind. We've mentioned that both Portugal and Ireland have relatively low visa fees. Canada is somewhere in the middle, and Australia that little bit higher. A country like Singapore, for example, is also a really great option, but their visa costs tend to really lean towards the higher echelons. Monitoring is immensely important. We all know that data is king, so keeping an eye on those visa expiries and the timeline for any reapplication back into the US is critical, either by internal systems or mobility dashboards. Also, keeping the US re-entry front of mind is important, considering options like the L1, which is an intra-company transfer visa, or other non-capped routes is something of which to be aware. And permanent establishment and compliance. We all know compliance is key, so being alive to payroll and tax considerations is immensely important. So in summary, parking is not just a backup, it's a smart retention and global mobility strategy. Where there's thoughtful planning, you can keep key talent engaged, reduce costs and compliance restrictions, and position your company for long-term success. Thank you, Brian.
Gemma, that is absolutely amazing. I'll be honest, I hadn't really thought about parking before, but it's such an important thing. Maybe that's just showing my ignorance and my lack of knowledge of exactly how the process works, but it's absolutely fascinating. We're going to move on. We're going to be talking about tax now. And I'm really excited. Backstage, we've got not one, but we've got two Vialto specialists. We've got both Julie Barron and we've got Ben Vanden Dungan. So everybody, you know how it works. Please hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. A big, big thank you to Gemma. And let's welcome to our stage Julie and Ben. Hey.
Hello, Brian. How are you?
I'm really good. So, Julie, start the introductions. Where in the world are we going today?
Today, we're going to go to the UK, where they have just kicked off a new tax year, and they've kicked off a whole new tax regime, basically. So Ben is going to give us some more details on what people need to be aware of and what's happening in the UK with this new tax year.
Cool. Over to you, Ben. Tell us all about it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Julia. Good to be back. So yes, we are in the new tax year in the UK now, and we have got the legislation passed for the new foreign income and gains regime, more affectionately known as FIG in the UK.
Foreign income and gains, FIG.
Exactly. we're getting figgy in the
UK.
UK.
You heard it first here. FIG. UK thing. Who would have thought you could grow figs in England?
Exactly.
Cheers.
Exactly. And so we do have the legislation now, and it has passed Parliament broadly as expected. There were no shocks at the last minute. So in a nutshell, what does that mean for employees? Well, it's a much shorter period now that employees will be able to exempt their foreign income and gains, or FIG, from UK taxation. So under the old rules, you could potentially get up to 15 years where you could exempt it if you kept it offshore. Under the new regime, that's being shortened to a much shorter 4-year period. An advantage of the new regime is it should be a bit simpler in terms of banking setup for employees. Under the old rules, you had to get paid into an offshore bank account, keep certain amounts offshore, etc., etc. That is disappearing, so that's good news. The downside, from an employee point of view, is maybe around the reporting. So HMRC are now looking to make a bit of a data grab when we report our tax returns, and they want everything to be reported on the tax return, even if you're exempting it. So under the old rules, you just kept it off, and that was fine. Under the new rules, you need to report it, and so employees will need to make sure they're collecting their data from all their overseas brokerage portfolios, pensions, but yeah, you name it. Potentially, it will need to go.
That's a lot of admin.
Exactly.
Especially with a different tax year, right, Ben?
Different tax year, and then different tax rules, for example, how CGT is calculated in the UK versus the US and stuff like that. So yeah, that's going to be one of the additional burdens for employees. Certainly we're going to start to see kicking in, at the end of this tax year, so from 6th of April next year. One of the other big changes was around overseas workday relief. So in the UK, you can exempt overseas work days, and that for employers is often quite a big tax saver, particularly when you look at equalisation. That you no longer need to be paid offshore, so that's good. More employees will probably qualify. The downside, once again, is there's now a cap on that. So HMRC have limited that to the lower of 30% of total income, or 300,000, whichever the lowest of those two. And the last point for employees, before I move on to employers, is just around inheritance tax. And so employees or individuals now come into the UK will be subject to UK inheritance tax once they've been here 10 years. And that's quite a big shock, for individuals that are now in the UK and hit that 10-year mark. Potentially now they are now subject to UK inheritance tax on their worldwide estate. And it's not cheap in the UK, it's at 40% broadly. So yeah, it is something for employees and employers to consider once you hit that 10-year mark. On the employer side, what are the key points that everybody needs to be thinking about? Well, our research shows most, if not all, employers are doing some sort of comms to their assignees and their affected populations, just given the magnitude of the changes. It could really hit them, at the end of this tax year when they do their tax return. Alongside their assignee population, also, if companies have a large local population of non-DOMs, we've seen a lot of employers also reach out to them. The second bit is just to think about what impact that may have on their mobility. So there's been a lot of press coverage about an exodus of non-DOMs from the UK, and certainly we have seen that over the past few months.
That's presumably talking about the really ultra high net worth.
Exactly.
Whereas in our industry, we're talking about people coming over on, typically shorter term contracts. So
exactly.
Is it them too, that level?
Yeah, I think so. And I think what we'll start to see, Brian, is what individuals, once they hit the end of that 4-year mark, so if people have been on assignment, potentially then localise or just on a long assignment, that 4-year mark is probably going to be the point where they say, well, I'm going to go back after this, or worst case, that 10-year mark when the IHT rules start to kick in. And then the last couple of points is just around equalisation policies and what effect this might have on costs. I think for larger populations, larger assignee populations in the UK, first 4 years, you're probably going to get a bit cheaper because everybody qualifies for FIG automatically, and you get that overseas workday relief automatically that will be applied. But certainly for high earners or people beyond that 4-year mark, the cost of equalisation is going to go up. So it's something to factor in to those cost calculations at the start of an assignment. The second part to that is maybe tweaking equalisation policies. So if you have UK specific schedules at the point that your remittance basis, or people are thinking they may leave the UK, do you decide to broaden it to include personal income to help alleviate some of the impacts that these changes may have? And so certainly we're starting to see employers start to think about that now. And then the last point just to mention is around Section 690s, and that's a bit technical. So, but broadly, that is where employers operate that overseas workday relief through the payroll. HMRC have a new system now. Anyone on a 690, if any employers have people on 690s, you can go and reapply. The old approvals won't stand anymore. You need to get a new automatic acknowledgement through the HMRC system. And surprisingly, we have tried some out and it does work. So that's a positive.
Okay, so Ben, thank you so much. And Julie, thank you as ever for being with us. I mean, who'd have thought it? Who'd have thought it? You're on a show and we can talk about both FIG and parking all in the same show. It's always like a real trivia question in which industry these both come into relevance. Anyway, we're going to move on. We've got backstage with us a guest who I know you're really going to enjoy meeting, the wonderful Ferzeen Chhapgar. So she's going to come on in a moment. So everybody, you know how it works. Please hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's say a big, big thank you to Ben and to Julie, and a big welcome to Ferzeen. Hey, Ferzeen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian.
So whereabouts in the world are you today, Ferzeen?
So, yeah, thanks, Brian. I'm here in Redwood City, California, and I am very, very excited. It's Wednesday, and it's Benevo time, and it's one of my favorite calls to be on.
Oh, bless you. And we are so excited to get you here. But people may not, I'm sure a lot of friends out there, but people may not know you. So, Ferzeen, let's just start off, because I know you're based out in California, but you're not from California originally. So where were you born? Tell us a bit about young Ferzeen.
So, yes, thanks, Brian. So I was born in Bombay in India. I grew up in Pune, and then I moved to California about a little over 2 decades ago in 2000, in the summer of 2000.
Right. So you moved in the summer of 2000. And what made you decide, and how did you go to the US? Tell us about that journey, because we're going to be talking about highly mobile employees, and I want to sort of make this personal and just find out a bit about your personal experiences too.
Sure. And I'm excited to talk about it because the mobility world, and now currently it's always evolving, right? So the short-term mobility assignments are exciting for me as well from my personal perspective. So there's this organization called ISEC that basically focuses on internships abroad. And I signed up for this, and it was completely random. It wasn't planned. And those checklists, I had picked every other country besides America, because I wanted to go to a country where I would learn another language. And
so how old were you at the time?
22.
Okay, so you were sitting at home in Mumbai. And you were saying to yourself, I want to have a bigger world experience. I want to go somewhere. And you went on this program.
Yes, and it happened so fast. Actually, Brian, while the the mentions were going on, I saw this one dear friend, and who's also a big champion of mine, and they were Kashmira. So hi, Kashmira. So basically, it was just 1 week to the next. Even I couldn't believe it. I got this internship. I told my mom, hey, I'm leaving. And they were like, where are you going? I'm like, to the US. And at that time, visas were not such a, like, you didn't have such a long wait. You'd go the day off at like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. You'd wait in line, get into the US consulate in Bombay, and they would return your passports the same evening. And
so on this program, you could have ended up going anywhere. So
yes,
you didn't have a choice. You could have been in France or Germany or, you know, whatever. And you ended up in California.
Yes, so the internship that I was doing was related to like IT, and it was supporting the World Wide Web. And the internship I got was at Yahoo. So to come and set up their global centers in Yahoo, like for reporting to their mail questions and things like that.
So we're talking 2000s. That's like sort of .com era, isn't it?
Yes, it was.
Okay,
yes.
So when the World Wide Web was a sort of thing that was exciting and new, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything was exciting. It was a first of like a lot of things. First from being away from home, first time in the US, first time exploring things and knowing that I have choices that I could make on my own. Because growing up in India, you always have family pressures, society pressures. You always do things for like everybody. So this was like the first time you could actually realize that, hey, you have a choice.
So how did your family react when at the age of 22 you just said, bye, I'm off and I'm not quite sure where I'm going, but I'm going to have fun?
So my family was all good, but I know some friends who were very highly disappointed. They're like, what? You never told us. And it was so hard for me to explain that this was not like a long planned cycle. This just things happened and it worked out and it was meant to be. So I ended up leaving. Yes.
Yeah, I should say, you know, is that you ended up in a global mobility role with one of the big consulting firms, but we'll get to that in a moment. So I want to sort of get the you know the story first. So you got on this plane, you didn't know anybody where you were going, so you went to a completely strange place. So Kashmira said one of the hardest days when you wrote the news you were leaving. So Kashmira, I'm guessing, was one of the people you left behind.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Kashmira. Glad you stayed in contact. Have you forgiven her? So anyway, so Ferzeen, tell me what it was like then. You packed a bag or two. How long were you intending to be in the US when you went out?
Like about 11 months.
Okay. So you landed. Tell us about what happened when you landed.
Let me tell you. This is really exciting. So I got on the plane, landed in the US, and while I was waiting for my luggage, somebody kept announcing, Mr. Chhapgar, please come to the lost baggage claim area, Mr. Chhap. And I was thinking to myself, how come this person doesn't know their name? 2 hours later, I go to the counter saying, hey, my bags haven't come. And the guy like starts yelling at me saying, we've been calling you for the last 2 hours. Only we were saying Mr. Chhapgar instead of Miss. And I'm like, that's not even how you say my last name. And he's like, well, what do I do with 2 H's then? And that was kind of funny because I thought, hey, I'm coming from an English-speaking background into an English-speaking country. I never thought that would be like the initial challenge at all. And then I was greeted by the people that were supposed to come.
So actually, Ali has said here, so many precious cultural differences. And let's get into some of those, because that's a great point Ali's made. So you're arriving, you've landed, your baggage is lost. People can't get around the fact that you've got 2 H's in your name and they don't know how to pronounce it. And they think Ferzeen might be a man, not a woman. So they're calling Mr. Chhapgar or whatever they say. So tell us what happens next. And I'm guessing in the year 2000, you didn't have a cell phone with you, or did you?
No, I didn't have a cell phone. I did not know how to read a map. I didn't even know how to use the payphone booths here. And as luck was on my side, right? The folks that were supposed to come pick me up at the airport decided they were going to go shopping to Gilroy at the outlet malls, and they lost track of time and they didn't show up. And when you come from India, they give you only $100 bills. They never give you any change or anything like that. And I didn't know how to use this.
Lucky with the tipping then.
Yeah, exactly. And then I asked I went to the duty-free store or whatever shop was there at the airport at checkout. And I said, can you please give me change? It wasn't duty-free, it was a convenience store, like a news stand kind of. And the guy looked at me like I was a lunatic, like who would give you $100 change? But this is a very common thing in India, that if you have a bigger note, you would go to a store and they would break it for you for no obligation.
I mean, how the world has changed. I mean, these days, I literally can't remember the last time I used cash.
Yeah.
Everything you just tap, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of it, you had to put quarters in the payphone, right? And I didn't know what a quarter meant. I didn't know what a dime was, and I didn't know what like a cent meant. So yeah, that's what
Obviously
it was.
done a lot of cultural preparation here, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically what taught me.
That's the 22-year-old Ferzeen. Yeah. These days, you'd have sort of done a little bit of cultural preparation.
That's true. That's true. And that's exactly what we can bring with the employee experience in the global mobility world, right? Like transparency, communication, and then also like the cultural aspects of it, like what to expect, the nuances of moving to a different location.
So what happened then? So you're in the US, you were doing your internship, but then that ended, didn't it? Tell us about that.
Oh, yes, the dot-com bubble burst. We got called into a room and they said everyone's laid off. And I did not know what it meant to be laid off. And I asked everyone, hey, what does that mean? Well, what do we do now? And they said, nothing. You pack your bags and go home. Because at that time, you had 10 days to either find another job or you leave. And so when we came back to our desk, our machine was like closed. We didn't have anything. We just had to say bye-bye to these friends that we met from international locations that became like family that we spent the last 10 months with.
So at this point, you're stuck in a foreign country with no job.
Yes.
Yeah. So
and great friends also. So that was kind of fun. And so a friend of mine says, hey, if you don't want to go back to India, why don't you come to France? I will leave now in 3 days and I will try to organize something and you come join me there. So I decided, okay, nothing wrong with that. I'm going to go to France. And so I packed my bags again and moved to France for a wee bit.
Was this Paris?
To Paris, yes. And then I was enjoying the lifestyle, and my family said they cannot support my fun lifestyle. I have to get a job. So I looked back at ISEC, came back on another internship to the US. And this was very exciting because I started my program with NASA, an incubator at NASA, where we were commercializing technologies from the scientists to the public sector, which was very, very exciting.
You've got a habit of landing some pretty exciting jobs. Yahoo in the dot-com bubble and NASA then. I mean, these are exciting. So let's fast forward a bit then. Okay, so you've got yourself back to the US. Now, you then did a little bit of work in consulting, but how did you end up in mobility? Let's sort of get the mobility focus into this now.
Sure. So there was... when I was consulting, we always brought on, so I was doing program management for large ERP system implementations. And we were bringing in a lot of talent from Asia, primarily from India, from the Philippines. A lot of companies had their delivery centers in these locations. And when these folks were coming on board, I found that, hey, they are not equipped. They are not well versed with what it means to be on site. And while that initial excitement is there when they land, their bubble is kind of bursted, right? It's the first time they have to do their laundry. It's the first time they have to cook meals for themselves, and they were just not equipped. And when I went for an orientation one time, that's when I got exposed to global mobility. And I thought, oh, this is so exciting. I would love to have this role. Just based on my experience, I could bring so much.
Hang on. So you worked for NASA, but you decided global mobility was more interesting.
Yeah, no, I worked at NASA, then I went into consulting. So NASA program closed down. They closed the incubator section down, sorry. And then I went to like Bearing Point, Price Waterhouse, EY. And while I'm no longer with any of those consulting firms now, I'm just going to talk based on my experience of what I had.
So you've worked with Bearing Point, PwC, and EY. So you've got some pretty deep knowledge of how big four firms, big consulting firms work. And we're going to be talking about mobility, in that sort of context, about how this works. So you got into mobility. So I interrupted, but you said you wanted to get into mobility. How did you actually manage it? How did you actually get into mobility?
Okay. So I'm just going to quote a poem from the great Rabindranath Tagore that basically says, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I woke and found that life was duty. I acted and behold, duty was joy. So pretty much for me, any kind of job that I did, I was excited about, and I always find the joy in it. But when I particularly found global mobility. And Brian, I know you've mentioned it before, that nobody dreams of being a global mobility expert at 5, right? But I do feel that certain personalities can enable you to be good or better at in a job. And I think that's where I found global mobility to be kind of like my passion, based
Yeah.
on my own experiences of how I was treated when I first landed and the impact that I could make for others coming in and their first times, but also the world of travel and being aware of what was possible.
Okay. So you approached somebody at EY and said,
Mhm.
"Can I have a job, please?"
Yeah, so no, I attended an orientation as a presenter for my J program, the batch that was coming to support my project. And I found, hey, what is this global mobility? I'd love to know more. And Kathy Winters was her name, as she was running this program then. And she says, oh, you can only get this role in these organizations when someone retires. And I thought, oh, that really sucks, because I'd love to be a part of this. And then one Sunday morning, like 6-7 months later, I get a phone call from Kathy saying, hey, would you be interested in this position? And I absolutely jumped on it, saying yes. And I think it's almost like my calling, because I really get passionate about it. And I really want mobility to be like for people, for growth, and for transformation, not just for the organization, but also for the people, bringing cultural awareness.
Okay, so I've got no idea if she's in the audience, but if you are, shouts out to Kathy, because if it hadn't been for her, she sort of came back to you. You know, she obviously kept your details or whatever and came back to you 6 or 9 months later, whatever it was, to say, actually, we've got an opening. And if that hadn't have happened, you wouldn't have been in the role that you've had now. So a real sort of career turning point.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us about the role then that you had in mobility and back in your EY days, for example.
Sure. So what I was focused on was like our global delivery centers and how we could mobilize our business in the Americas. So that was kind of my primary role. And what that meant was making sure we knew exactly kind of the talent and the skills we had available in the global delivery centers. And this was a large pool of people, right? From like 50 to 70,000 people. It grew over the 10 years that I was in this role. And then
okay, so that's quite cool. So what? Let's try, you know, for companies that don't do this. So what these firms do is that they keep what is essentially a big database of all the potential people that could be moved. And what are you trying to track in this database? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so there are multiple things we look at, right? So in professional services, while we don't sell a product, the people are the ethos of the organization, right? So everything happens because of the people, what kind of skills they bring in, and how they are able to support the business. So at one point in time, they were using mobility like to be cost effective, just to make sure that, hey, we land somebody from overseas here, and they would do a blended cost rate. This goes into like more complexities of how we price the projects outside and deliver execute on the project, like whatever that may be, delivery of like coding or ERP system or business transformation, however that works. But what happens in that, there's a lot of back end work where some of this work can be done overseas, in which case we do not bring people onshore. But in many industries like the insurance and financial industries, this work cannot be shipped internationally. So in that case, we have to find this pool of talent to come in and support our business here. And how do we find that? How do we bridge that gap kind of? So I almost was like a matchmaker trying to see that what skills are available in our delivery centers that we could bring on to support our business onshore.
So the line will be saying to you that we need whatever 20 people to work on a project in Canada or the USA or wherever it might be. And what you're then doing is you're going through that through the delivery center. I call it a database. I know it's going to be a lot more sophisticated than that, but you're going to be going through that. And what sort of things are you looking for when you're trying to match the person to the job, and what sort of information would you be collecting on them?
Sure. So it is a lot of information from like personal information, because most of these short-term assignments do not allow for family travel. So it's normally, so it would be someone with specific experience, someone who's willing to leave their family or doesn't have a family that's willing to travel from anything from like a couple days to like 11 and a half months. We try to keep the long-term, like the short-term assignments under 12 months, because in the US, if they cross the 12-month mark, they're considered residents and they could be tax liable, and there are all these other complications that come up. So we do that. And then we also kind of figure out like the roles and responsibilities, what the host country will play and the home country will play while these folks are on assignment. And then repatriation, and if they're on a career trajectory, like a growth career path, right? So of course, the people that we want on site are the super performers, the ones that are able to dive in and hit the ground running, which sometimes is a challenge on its own, that they could be great offshore, but here not so much. And then people with whatever the hot skills are for that market, because in the consulting world today, cyber and AI can be hot. Like 2 years ago, it was SAP. Like it could be anything like that. So working with the business really to understand what their sales pipeline looks like, what their committed sales pipeline look, and then preempting the skills that they would need for these kind of assignments. So there's a lot of fine tuning behind the scenes that go on before we bring these people on. And then also what kind of benefits we provide for them, what kind of employee experience we would like to have. And again, communicating often with all the stakeholders and really having integrity is what counts in this role, or what I found was very, very important. And to be completely transparent to the business of what it means, and also to the employees, that coming here does mean you have to do your own laundry. It does mean you have to cook. It does mean that there is public transportation in certain areas, etc.
Before we get onto that, were you also then doing visa readiness assessments as well?
Yes.
So tell us a bit about that aspect. About, so you got these people where you got all their details. Are you then sort of checking their right to work status?
Yes. So there is, of course, we work with, like I mentioned, global mobility is like an onion, right? We peel back all these layers. We work with HR, we work with law firms, we work with the employees and the business. And for that visa readiness, it starts very early on, right? So they have to provide, the employee provides the documentation. Then we work with our legal partners to make sure everything is on track. Sometimes birth certificates are an issue where they're not in the English language, and do they need to be like translated? The educational mark sheets that vary. So those were the kind of things. But also, it's very important that when these people were going for these visa interviews, right, they were failing a lot of times because they were not prepared. They would get so nervous and just this. So we would have like mock interviews for them to just better prepare them based on what kind of questions, based on our experience, what we've had. And then as these resources would go for the interviews, we would come back and ask them, hey, what were the questions that you got? And we would kind of build a database like that and train our people to make sure that they're confident to get visa ready.
So was that inbound into the US from overseas, or was that also US people going the other way?
When US people go the other way, it was more so they were a little bit more senior level people that were going, and it was more from a training perspective. So instead of bringing 20 people from our delivery centers here, we would take somebody from a manager level or above and put them in those centers to help them coach and train.
Well, let's stick on the junior people then. So with the junior people, they were mainly inbound. So they would be sitting in whatever their home country was, and you'd be sending them off to do their visa applications, and then you'll be speaking to them afterwards.
Right.
So these people coming into the US, what sort of age profiles are we talking about? Were they like you were back in the day, young people leaving their country for the first time in many cases?
Some of them, yes. I would say most of them were between either the 1 to 5 year mark for the J visa program, and then many of them were from the 7 to 10 year mark of years of experience. When I say 5 years or 7 to 10 years, it means years of experience. So they were coming either as subject matter experts or as interns. And that brings also other complexities, right? Because with these folks, some people may have health-related challenges. Some people suddenly feel completely isolated when they are here. And it could also be that they're certain, like life is not certain, right? So somebody could lose their life on assignment. Like it is just, when you think about, it's like an untamed beast. I think global mobility in the short-term assignment world is like an untamed beast where there's always something new that you think you've covered it all, but it's brand new, right? So in that instance, again, it's very important that before the assignment starts, everybody understands their roles and responsibilities, including the business leadership. It's also important that the employees understand that underperformance, what does that mean for them, what it looks for them, and if they're being overworked or underutilized. So you're like their family, basically, where they feel comfortable to pick up the phone and call you to say, hey, you know what, I'm getting divorced, or hey, my boss is not utilizing me to the best of the capacity. And that is the kind of relationship or the go-to of trustworthiness that they should have with the mobility expert.
So this is mobility as an agony aunt. You're dealing with the problems, or the issues, the challenges that people are facing in their lives when they were on assignment. And also, I'm guessing when you're doing a short-term assignment like this, it can also be pretty lonely.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You're from home, and maybe you're even not sure about exactly whether the job is exactly for you. You're in the foreign country. You may not be in the buzziest center ever. You might be somewhere in an off-site area that isn't, not quite the buzziest area. So tell me about that. How do you sort of keep people motivated? And was that part of your role?
It wasn't part of my defined role, Brian, but I definitely took it on as an extension of my role. And that was also, again, I found that when they come from these countries, they kind of tend to look for similarities. They want to eat the same kind of food. They want to interact with the same kind of people. Growing up in certain countries like India and the Philippines, their social life is very, very active. While here in the US, it's only on the weekends or some holiday or something like that. And so I used to have monthly touch points with the entire group that was there. Basically, we would theme it. Sometimes if it was Halloween, like a spooky theme, sometimes during Christmas, ugly sweater theme. But also they knew that if they called me at any point in time, Ferzeen was going to answer the phone, right? And sometimes business...
So did that happen? Were you getting calls?
Oh, yes. I would get calls at 4 a.m. I would get calls at midnight. I would get calls. And it would be like anything. How do I run the coffee machine? Or one time someone put their pair of jeans in the microwave thinking it's going to dry, and it blew up because the buttons exploded.
I can't believe that somebody actually called their colleague at work at 4 a.m. in the morning or midnight on that sort of thing. That's just... And I can understand that if it was like VIPs and senior people, but we're talking about fairly junior people in the organization.
So I like to treat everyone the same, Brian. So that's yeah. And I think that also sets a standard, right? So what we emulate is what we can expect from other people. So if I have high standards for someone to do something for me, I would want to do that for them as well.
Right.
So that's basically what it is. But there are emergency situations, right? So somebody, for instance, they decided they were going to go hiking alone, or they were going to go bungee jumping, but this is not covered by insurance. So how do you kind of let them know? So all of this happens with a lot of cultural awareness and training as well, right? So somebody may need kidney dialysis twice a week, in which case we don't want to deny the person the assignment if they're good at work, but could we then move them from home country payroll to host country payroll so they can have better insurance benefits and the opportunity to explore working internationally. And then I was also a step further is how do you invest in these people once they return home? Right. So short-term assignment, 3 months, 4 months. OK, but if they are here 12 months, or if they have to go back, complete a break in service and come back for another 12 months, 11 months or whatever, how do you help them integrate back into the system? And that was kind of where also not part of my job role, but something I definitely brought on the forefront with our leadership to say that, hey, if we have an open headcount of 15 people in the year, could 5 of them be for people who've already supported your mobility assignment and they have expressed an interest to move? Or when they go back home to their home country, what would that layout look like? And there is a great book by Bill Bryson called I'm a Stranger Here Myself. And this is a really funny book that talks about this American guy who used to be a newspaper journalist, moved to England, and then he moved back to Des Moines, Iowa with his family. And it really hits home because sometimes people think, oh, it's no big deal, they can go back. But that's already a failed mobility assignment if we don't know what they're going to do once they return. At least 30, 60 days. Are they going to train? Are they going to be like a train the trainer? Are they going to like accelerated growth? Are they going to bring leadership and cultural diversity in the teams, etc.? Like knowledge sharing, basically.
So this is basically working on the career pathway because, you know, a lot of mobile employees, you know, they'll work overseas and they sort of get forgotten.
Yes.
But so, and I remember someone saying, having a poll once with some leading mobility leaders, and I said, is working overseas good for your career or bad? And I was surprised at how many of them said it's actually bad for your career because you get forgotten. And you're obviously very much guarding against that. So tell us a bit more about what you put in place as career pathways, so you could in some way leverage their international experience for the long-term growth to make them, if you like, step up rather than be held back in their career development.
Right. So it's almost like a business partner role, Brian, that we would get into, because what we want to make sure is their managers also understand, right? It's not like they are filling a void or kind of like an emergency to fill it here, but to backfill them there once they return home. What would that career path look like? And it's also a commitment from leadership at that point in time where they support these initiatives for people, both in the home and host country. So again, I would put that back on like the leadership to say, hey, if they've had an international mobility assignment, this is what their growth trajectory would look like because they are star performers. And that kind of helped with retention as well of the employees versus them just moving, because the consulting world is kind of promiscuous in a certain sense where they just move from firm to firm or from firm to industry. And to retain that talent after we've invested thousands of dollars on a mobility assignment is kind of the key, because that's the sweet spot of where we actually can leverage that mobility assignment.
Okay. We actually did a poll during the week. I'd be interested to see what the audience say, and then we'll discuss it. Which aspect of managing your short-term assignees or business travelers is the most time-consuming or challenging? And I'll give you, maybe we'll take your views first. I'll give you 4 choices. Ensuring visa compliance, finding suitable housing, booking travel, or actually tracking and monitoring. So tell us about your perspectives on those 4.
Sure, Brian. I would have to go with the 4th option, tracking and monitoring, just because sometimes these mobility assignments get made or committed to in the void, and we sometimes don't even know who is coming into the country if this happens, right? So I think the main thing would be to put processes in place where every mobility assignment is initiated either through like this fancy Benevo system or some kind of system or process that the people accountable for mobility know that the people are getting the right support, whether it is in terms of visa applications, whether it's in terms of making sure they have housing, whether it's making sure like their travel logistics, and also that their families are aware that this is kind of happening. So the family also needs to have an emergency point of contact, and we need to have an emergency point of contact that should something happen, like an unfortunate loss of life or an accident while they were here and that needs rehabilitation and they need to return home, etc. So I would say tracking and monitoring is key. And that is one aspect of like the physical, but there's also other tracking and monitoring in terms of visas, where they are. Did their visa get denied? How did they kind of so that is another thing as well. When is their passport expiring? Sometimes people don't even keep track of when their passport is expiring and they need to travel and the passport is expiring in 2 days and they cannot do this mobility assignment. So there's a lot that goes into tracking and monitoring. And then also after the assignments, right? So while they are here, how they are performing, once they leave, how they are performing. So I would say tracking and monitoring for me was like is like key.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure actually if we asked a random selection of the population, or indeed a random selection of our audience out here now, do you know the year in which your passport expires? a lot of people wouldn't know without actually getting it out and looking at it.
Yeah.
One day they get an awful shock. But we've talked about that. Tell us about housing, actually, because that's one that actually I'll show you what the audience said. The audience actually, number one, they said was 53% was visa compliance, housing 17%. Nobody said booking travel was the hardest. And tracking and monitoring, which is where you came out, was 30%. But tell us a bit about some of the others. Tell us a bit about housing. How did you handle that?
So housing for us was normally handled by an external vendor. So it would be Oakwood or any such vendor like that that would manage the housing. And we give them set criterias, right? So it was like either $200, whatever that is, $200 per day in like Texas, or $250 per day in San Francisco or New York for initial kind of the housing requirements. What we would also do is that they are under 30 days, we would always put them in a hotel, like a Residence Inn or something. And if they were supposed to be longer term, we would give them apartments to stay, because they would have their own, and the apartments would have like twice a month cleaning service. All of this was manned by the housing team. What we did find, Brian, in many instances, was that sometimes these people were not even managing their homes. Like it was, they forget that these mobile employees, they are like brand ambassadors. They're building their own personal brand, but they're also ambassadors for their country and the global organization that they're a part of. And a messy house or a housekeeping error where they break things and they misuse things, that kind of becomes like a risk and a challenge for us to manage. So putting some of that onus back on the employees, but also for when we find these housing situations, right? Like what they could provide, what they won't provide, that is what was key for us for suitable housing. Close to work locations, so they may not need public transportation or rent a car, things like that. And safety, of course, safety was primary when we found housing. So our vendors had a list of the basic requirements, and based on that is what they would find housing or source housing for our people.
Okay. I must give a shout out at this point to my wonderful colleagues at Benevo. You said we had some pretty cool tech, and indeed we do. And we got technology that manages the processes, manages the tracking, the monitoring, the immigration compliance. We don't do immigration, but managing the process, all that sort of stuff is done with the tech that we've got. But just as we get to the last few minutes, actually, Ferzeen, if you were to have a conversation with your 22-year-old self, what advice, and look back at what you've learned over all these years in global mobility, and then look at the innocent young woman that came across in 2020 with only, in the year 2000 with only $100 bills and no cell phone. What advice would you give yourself or to someone else doing it early on in their career?
So for me personally, even today, Brian, I think it is just to be open, right? Explore. Like it was not a setback that all of these things happened. It was just an opportunity to learn and do something different. So I would always tell people that a mobility assignment is for enriching yourself, and it's like to empower you. So whatever you do, however you do it, find like the bright side of it and make the most of it, because these assignments really give you the ability to meet people that you would otherwise have never met, and explore cultures that would and cultural sensitivities that otherwise you've only heard of but never lived. So I would say do it again, pack your bags, decide where you're going, and move, right? And do it with full faith, integrity, and openness. Yeah,
absolutely. These things tend to work out in the end, as they said, I can't remember which move it was in, is everything works out in the end, and if it hasn't worked out yet, then it's just not the end.
That's right.
We'll find a way. So we're getting towards the end of our show. It's been absolutely fascinating. We are back next week when we're going to be talking about how you connect global mobility with talent, which I know is a subject that's very, very dear to your heart. I also know, Ferzeen, that you are sort of looking for a new role at the moment. So shout out anybody out there.
Thank you, Dan.
Wants an amazing global mobility specialist, then Ferzeen is certainly a very strong candidate. So we're back next week. I'm going to bring back our other guests. So we got the our regular, the wonderful Julie Barron. We've got Ben, her colleague at Vialto. We've got the amazing Gemma Hislop, who stood in this week for Julie Onslow Cole. And of course, we've got our wonderful producer, Tally Gorin. It has been a fascinating show. We've had great discussions. We've had a lot of fun. Sadly, it is the end of our hour. So, as Stefan said, great insights from Ferzeen. Very enjoyable story to which to listen. All it remains is for me, as we've got 5 seconds left, is to say goodbye to everybody. Have a great week. Take care, and we'll see you again this time next week. Have a great, great week, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.